Good morning to you, and we are live on the YouTubes. Get on the Times Radio YouTube channel. The cameras are on. We're gearing up for PMQs Unpacked. No Tim Shipman this week, but Patrick Maguire is here. Patrick Maguire, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Matt. How are you?
I'm very good. I said the cameras are on. Somebody throw the big switch. Have we thrown the big switch? We'll be live on the YouTube shortly, apparently. Any minute now. Brian? No. Patrick, what do you expect to happen at PMQs today, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. Will Keir Starmer hold Rishi Sunak's feet to the fire in Ukraine? Given Zelensky's there, I suspect not. There's a lot of agreement between the two sides on that issue. It wouldn't surprise me if he attempted to undermine the Prime Minister's big reshuffle yesterday. I suspect there's a big good story in the FT this morning about the Treasury putting a block on all new levelling up spending, essentially. So I do wonder whether the Prime Minister, God, it's not 2024 yet, whether Keir Starmer might go for that.
I wonder if Zelensky's going to go to PMQs.
Well, he might be in the gallery.
He might be sitting in the gallery. What else is he going to do for the hour otherwise?
You know, they will look up to the gallery, stand and applaud.
There'll be an applause.
Quite possibly, that's where there is a diplomatic gallery where foreign dignitaries sit, and he's not speaking in Westminster Hall till afterwards. So I suspect he will be in there
at 1 o'clock. All eyes on that, Patrick.
He wants to be in here, though.
Yeah, he wants to be here so he can pause the action. If he wants to pop in, he's very welcome. Let's face Patrick Maguire will be back with PMQs Unpacked live at 12 o'clock. We'll pause the action between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. But what about all those other MPs in the House of Commons this lunchtime who won't be there after the next election? Should they get a medal? That's one idea put forward in a new report talking about the redundancy offer given to MPs when they stand down. It says it's ungenerous compared to international standards and might be putting off our brightest and best from entering politics. The report was put together by Sir Charles Walker, the Conservative MP who chairs the administration committee, who joins me now. Hi, Charles.
Good morning.
What do you think the package should look like for an MP who loses their seat?
So the main thrust of this report actually is about the fact that there's a huge career cliff edge when people enter politics. The average tenure is about 9 years. And what happens is people come into Parliament, they serve their time, and when they leave, we've discovered that it's very difficult for many, to re-enter the labour market because they've been out of their career for a number of years. And we make a number of suggestions around actually having accredited micro qualifications while they're serving their constituents around dispute, negotiation, mediation, so on and so forth. So actually, when MPs leave Parliament, either voluntarily or at the behest of their electorate, they've actually got better employment prospects at the point of departure. But we also focus on the fact that many MPs, when they do leave, do not get a huge amount of money and don't have a huge amount of time to look for a job. So a number encounter quite significant financial hardship. And one of the other problems is that you actually get to a point where members of Parliament in safe seats cling on for dear life because they're too concerned about what will happen if they choose to leave voluntarily and there isn't enough support during the few months, maybe longer, that they require to find a new job.
Well, in fact, let's bring in one former MP, Luciana Berger, former Labour frontbencher who lost her seat in 2019, albeit started for a different party at that point. Morning, Luciana.
Good morning, Matt.
What was it like for you then when you left? Because clearly it was a very tumultuous time in politics. You left the Labour Party and then left Parliament altogether. Presumably that wasn't part of the plan when you first became an MP.
No, it wasn't part of the plan, and that's politics. You can't always plan, and things happen that you might not foresee. I think that's part of the challenge, that you also it's such an enormous privilege to be a member of Parliament, and once you stop becoming an MP, you can't do it anywhere else. So there is a responsibility and job that comes with departing and to do the best by the staff that have often worked with MPs for a large number of years to make them redundant, to do everything that you're required of from the Information Commissioner in terms of data and handing over cases to your successor. In my case, I was an MP in Liverpool, and having to sell my home and to close down offices, my constituency offices. That is a massive job and task in and of itself. And then you've also got to think about what comes next, because you might be able to apply some of the skills that you develop as an MP in other jobs elsewhere, but you can't do the entire role of an MP somewhere else. there was a particular challenge, I think, after the last election in 2019, because it was around the time that Brexit was essentially happening, and it was also just before the pandemic. So there's kind of additional challenges that were presented at that time, but trying to do everything, doing your responsibility to do the whole, very significant process to make staff redundant and to close those offices. That takes time. It's not stuff that can be done overnight. And concurrently, as the system is currently designed, MPs are expected to also find alternative employment in that 2-month window. So there's a lot to do in a very short space of time, and to move home. So I think the report comes up with some really practical recommendations to ease that process, so that it's as much about how we treat people on the way out as we welcome them on the way in, so that we have, what I'm concerned about most is that we have a parliament that respects and reflects, I should say, the vibrant democracy that we live in, and it attracts people from all different backgrounds, of all different ages, from all different places across the UK. And it isn't seen prohibitive that if you lose your seat, that you then kind of essentially get spat out the other end, but you can't actually continue to make a difference, can't find alternative employment.
I was just watching, actually, President Zelensky has just left Downing Street on his way to Parliament, but it's being suggested he's not going to attend PMQs. Oh. But don't worry, because we will bring you PMQs Unpacked. So what about, how useful are ex-MPs? Alex Gordon-Shute runs a company called Ithaca Partners, which often headhunts people who've worked in politics, MPs, SPADs and civil servants. Alex, nice. Thanks for coming in. Are MPs useful? Ex-MPs useful? Who wants an ex-MP?
They're very useful, partly because they've got fantastic skills in all sorts of different areas. They've been used to being representational for the organisation that they serve, representational for their constituents. They are great problem solvers and conflict resolvers. They've also got tremendous communication skills most of the time, because that's been a core part of how they've been elected and how they've managed great relationships with their constituents, or perhaps less great relationships if they're being voted out. But the comm skills are important.
Do they all have those? Is it just the nature of being an MP for 4 or 5 years that you'll be good at all that? Or do you come across some MPs, you just think, ex-MPs, what am I supposed to do with you?
Most of them are really good at this, and they are also incredibly emotionally committed. I mean, if you think about the number of MPs we've got in the UK, it's more than 650. Sure, the headlines get grabbed by a small proportion of that group. But most MPs are quietly doing fantastic public service work for their constituents. So they're hugely committed. They love the sense of public service and serving organisations or populations. So they're generally pretty good people, and they're also pretty smart. You don't tend to get elected, and pretty well organised. You don't tend to get elected unless you've got both those qualities.
Yeah. Just by the way, some people might portray it. Charles, is part of the problem that a few of your colleagues are bad eggs, and it just gives everyone else a bad name? Us just talking about this right now, we've got loads of messages coming in saying, not interested, you're not a special case, what planet are you on? And actually, it's because the bad eggs, you all get tarred with the same brush.
So it's really interesting. I come from a business background, and what I hear your listeners say, and people in newspapers say, we want better MPs. All MPs are rubbish. We want better MPs. So actually, coming from a business background, I went away and thought about that, and we published an evidence-based report on how things might improve, because basically we're in a war for talent at the moment. If you're 30 and 40, you've got a range of opportunities, you're bright and able. What am I going to do with my life? I've got to say, politics looks really pretty unattractive now. You come in, you're removed from your career. While you're in Parliament, yes, there are wonderful things you do, but you're under huge pressure, and actually personal threat as well, which has become part of many of my colleagues' everyday life. So if we want to get the bright and the best people, your listeners have to be open to the idea of, if we want better members of Parliament, let's try and treat MPs better. And I think really now is the time to have a serious decision, because if you want things to go on as they are, and you want really bright, talented, able people to say, you must be mad if you think I'm going to go into Parliament, then let's stick with the status quo.
Yeah.
But if you want to have a serious grown-up discussion, then let's look at some of the possible solutions that might actually encourage people to come into this place, without fearing the career death that often marches hand in hand with it now.
Alex, would you become an MP?
I wouldn't. I think the pressures are enormous. I think the way that organisations support people as they exit, though, is a real signal of their respect for the way somebody's done the job. And those jobs are really tough. There are two ways organisations can support people on the way out. One is with money, and it's not just the financial value, it's more that money buys people time. And it does take time to find another job, particularly, as Luciana was talking about earlier, if it takes time, you're very focused immediately as you leave Parliament on winding everything up.
And I suppose the market's suddenly flooded with people like you as well.
And I was going to say, and after an election, quite often the market is quite flooded with people like you. So it takes a while, but it also takes a while to go through processes for other jobs and to work out what it is you want to be doing.
Luciana, would it have been an easier process for you if you'd got a medal from the Speaker at the end of it?
I read that recommendation with interest.
You see, you're not a politician anymore. You are still a politician.
I don't feel like I need a medal. I take I can reflect on the contributions that I made as a recompense and an acknowledgement of the contribution.
Yeah.
But
is it just that you want a medal, Charles? Because I know you're standing there.
No, look, I've done extremely well as a member of Parliament.
We've got a
There are many of my colleagues are here who are for 5 or 10 years. And actually, a thank you with the Speaker, with a medallion, often very similar to that we give to former mayors in the borough of Broxbourne and across our boroughs here to reflect their service, actually would be quite a nice thing to do with MPs, friends and families. I don't think why, I don't understand why people would think that's such a terrible thing. We often give gold watches to people and other parting gifts, so a medal of service, I think, is not a bad idea.
Well, Charles, I'm afraid to say that based on the message we've had, you need to, there might be a bit more work to do to persuade them on the medallion, but really appreciate it as ever. Charles Walker, Luciana Berger and Alex Gordon-Shute, thanks so much for joining us on Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. In a moment, PMQs Unpacked live. But first, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. President Zelensky is in the Houses of Parliament after meeting Rishi Sunak in Downing Street. He's travelled there ahead of addressing peers and MPs in Westminster Hall, and later he'll meet the King. More than 11,100 people have died in Turkey and Syria from earthquakes this week. Rescue teams are saving people from under the concrete, but experts are warning that it's coming to the end of the crucial window for finding people alive. The Fire Brigades Union's holding last-minute talks to try to avoid strikes. It's in a row over pay. And LeBron James believes he's the best basketball player ever. He's now the NBA's all-time leading point scorer. We'll have a full news and sports roundup at past. But now, live on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Patrick Maguire.
And it's a very good afternoon to Patrick Maguire. I've not seen you for PMQs Unpacked
look,
for a while.
There are literally dozens, or maybe half a dozen people in Southport. Every time I go back, man of the people that I am, they say, "Why haven't you been on Times Radio doing PMQs recently?" So
here you are.
I can look down the barrel of the camera to Simon Helm in his van and say, "Here I am, mate."
Well, lots of people are tuning in on the YouTube channel. Luke and Art and John, Alex, loads of people. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. Oh, here we are. Here are all the hellos. Candy in upstate New York, Craig in Cape Town, Richard in Fleet. Richard, I met Richard. He cornered me outside a shop. We had a selfie.
Really?
Yeah, luckily I wasn't doing it. I wasn't like buying anything embarrassing. Yeah, I assume that's the same one. Anyway, hello, Richard. Get on the YouTube channel if you want to watch along. We will come to the first exchanges with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak in just a moment. But because President Zelensky is in Westminster, he's in the Houses of Parliament, we don't think he's watching PMQs, but we'll keep an eye on that. Let's just hear what Rishi Sunak said in his opening statement.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that President Zelensky is here in the United Kingdom today. It is a testament to the unbreakable friendship between our two countries, and I'm proud that we are expanding the training for Ukrainian forces to include jet pilots and Marines and ensure that Ukraine has a military able to defend its interests today and into the future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
And looking at the pictures from the Commons Chamber, Patrick Maguire, everyone wearing the British-Ukraine badges. We were talking about badges this week with Daniel Finkelstein. In fact, Keir Starmer's wearing one. Rishi Sunak isn't. I'm not sure what we should read into that. I'm probably not sure that it was Zelensky.
Well, you know, there are certain members of the Conservative Party who think Rishi Sunak is soft on Ukraine, so I'm sure that'll launch 1,000 conspiracy theories. It's interesting. I suspect Keir Starmer, judging on the conversations I've had with Labour people this morning, is going to use this opportunity not to try and score partisan points, but bring the House together, pose as, statesman in waiting. But also, there are doubts about whether Rishi Sunak's actuarial approach to policy making will mean the UK makes difficult and unpopular decisions in Kiev about its commitment to Ukraine, whether its commitment to Ukraine is conditional on the fiscal situation in this country. So it'll be interesting to see whether Keir Starmer tries to outflank him on that, but I suspect we'll see Keir Starmer devote all 6 of his questions to Ukraine here.
Interesting as well. There's quite a moment for Rishi Sunak getting on the front foot a bit. The whole time he's been Prime Minister, he's been clearing up the economic mess, in a pickle over strikes, in a pickle over Nadeem Zahawi, Gavin Williamson, and actually a bit of being the Prime Minister, welcoming Zelensky to Downing Street, on the steps of Downing Street. It's one of the first major world leaders at all, I think, to come and visit him of any great note. There'll be someone very important I've missed. And then going out and seeing some big, expensive military kit. And, that's part of the job, a bit of projecting your role as being Prime Minister, not just dealing constantly with crises.
Yeah, and it's unquestionably a good news story for Rishi Sunak, both on the national stage but also within the Conservative Party, that President Zelensky still judges the UK, despite the departure of Boris Johnson, his friend and foremost ally among Western leaders, that Zelensky still makes the judgment that the UK is his most steadfast ally in the West, given that he is blindsided the EU by coming here before he visits Brussels tomorrow.
Well, there are loads of you online already watching along. If you are watching along, put it on your social medias. Tell your friends. Tell your friends to get on the YouTubes. Go to the youtube.com. Not the YouTube, that's not a website. Go to youtube.com, search Times Radio. And you can find us there. Hi from Austria, says Edwin. Love the show, Matt and Patrick. Hello from sunny Shropshire, from SE20 and from SE21. Very close to each other. Enfield, Marrakesh, Croatia. You're all there watching along on the YouTube channel. Here we go then. Let's go live to the House of Commons. It's question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 11,000 people have died as a result of the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and that number is sadly rising. And I know many families here in the UK will be anxiously awaiting news. I'm sure I speak for the whole House in saying our hearts go out to each and every victim and their families, and we must do all we can to support the rescue and recovery effort. Mr. Speaker, this House is honoured to be addressed today by President Zelensky. From the outset of the war, he has symbolised the heroism, the resolve and the bravery of his people. The Prime Minister and I joined this House together in 2015. We've lived through important moments in our domestic and international politics. But none of those experiences compares to the pain and suffering of the people of Ukraine. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that right across this House it is vital that we all continue to stand together in full support of Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I first join with the honourable member for paying our respects and thoughts to the people of Turkey and Syria, particularly those affected by the earthquake and the first responders who are doing such a valiant job. The House will be reassured to know that we are in touch with the Turkish and Syrian authorities and providing all assistance that they have required of us, including 77 search and rescue responders that arrived yesterday and have already begun work. And I spoke to the President yesterday to ensure that we are in close communication. And can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments on Ukraine. It's something that not only the whole country can be proud of, but the entire House can be proud that we came together to stand by Ukraine when the moment mattered, and that we will continue to stand with them united as one Parliament and one United Kingdom.
So let's just jump in there, as we always do, pausing the action, Patrick. You're completely right that Keir Starmer really sort of bringing the House together. And trying to put himself right alongside Rishi Sunak. It's something that hadn't occurred to me before. They both became MPs in 2015. And there's an age gap. Rishi Sunak's 42 and Keir Starmer's 60. But it's sort of interesting that they've only been MPs for the same length of time.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And, you know, and they're both sort of new entries to politics as well, despite Keir Starmer's lengthy record of public service as a barrister and as the director of public prosecutions. Both sides of the House would admit they are sort of political neophytes, and it's it's certainly interesting in that respect. But Keir Starmer's rhetoric there, you know, as I was saying, it's not at all partisan yet. I suspect we might see towards the end of this line of questioning Keir Starmer try and draw out Labour's own defence policy, which his aides describe as pretty hawkish. We can expect some pretty hawkish lines from Keir Starmer at some point during this exchange. But for the time being, it's very careful, very considered, very statesmanlike, you'd say, from both of them.
But there's an interesting question, isn't there? And we spoke to Stuart MacDonald earlier on, an SNP MP, who actually went to Ukraine last year and met Zelensky. And he was making the point that time and again, we've said, no, we're not going to send this type of missile. And then we've ended up doing it. We're not going to send tanks. And then we've ended up doing it. There's currently debate about whether or not we should send jets. And it's a reason why I don't know what the answer is. But if we'd done all the things we are doing now, all of them 6 months ago, would that have made a material difference to the outcome of the war?
And that is a really interesting question. And it speaks to a broader point about Rishi Sunak's political style. And obviously that sort of period of, you know, Western introspection, debate, and then giving the Ukrainians what they asked for a month ago is partly a consequence of all the moving parts in the Western alliance. But you could also make a point about Rishi Sunak there, is that he seldom makes a decision if it's not coming from a defensive crouch. You know, you saw that even over furlough and lockdowns and all of that stuff, it was preceded by a lengthy period of time. Nadeem Zahawi, another one, a lengthy period of time where he was facing criticism. Now, it'll be interesting to see if Keir Starmer, like Boris Johnson, it's not often you see Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson take the same line on anything, call for the Prime Minister to do more immediately.
It's really interesting. And actually, you know, so a bit like about Boris Johnson domestically, but he was right from the very beginning, full square with Ukraine, far ahead of other European countries. So
and that's why it's a very difficult thing for number 10 to fight back against Boris Johnson. You can't say, look, it's a welcome corollary for Boris Johnson that he gets all this publicity and people like you and I are referring to him in favourable terms. But it's hard to argue that this is an ego trip for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, because or becoming, you know, a belated bandwagon exercise. Well, let's go back to the House of Commons then. This is PMQs Unpacked. Question number 2 from Keir Starmer.
The record is the right honourable Keir Starmer.
That's just Lindsay Hoyle pointing out that Keir Starmer is the right honourable
every
gentleman.
time Putin has been appeased...
We'll explain why in a minute.
...he's been back for more. And so does the Prime Minister agree with me that across this House we must speak with one voice and say this terrible conflict must end with the defeat of Putin in Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, our objective remains to ensure a Ukrainian victory in this conflict. Vladimir Putin's aggression cannot be seen in any way to have been successful, and that's why we have accelerated and increased our support militarily for Ukraine this year. It's a decision that I took as Prime Minister. Today we are going even further, not just having provided Challenger tanks and being one of the first countries to do so, which catalysed the provision of tanks from other nations as well, but also today to move to start training Ukrainian Marines in the advanced capabilities they will need to mount further offensive, but also to train their pilots on advanced combat aircraft. So the House can be reassured we will continue to support Ukraine to ensure decisive military victory on the battlefield this year.
Interesting. Decisive military victory on the battlefield this year. That's setting quite a potentially high bar, because there are lots of people who want Ukraine to win this, but less confidence about how or when.
The timescale. It's interesting as well, right? That was very much the flip side of the other striking statement Rishi Sunak made there, which was a decision I made. He was saying it's not a case of I've inherited Boris Johnson and Liz Truss's policy in this. He says, I have made a decision to spend this money now. But you wonder, decisive military victory this year, does that leave the door open, if you are, say, Boris Johnson or Volodymyr Zelensky listening to this, to the possibility that the UK in a year's time says, well, look, we've put all our eggs, all our cash in the basket marked Ukrainian victory this year. That's not happened. What's the outlook now? Is it time to start looking at negotiated settlement? We are, we're leaping way ahead of this session in PMQs, but these are the questions people listening will be asking.
Just on that intervention from Lindsay Hoyle, because we've got the preeminent Lindsay Hoyle impressionist here in the studio with us. What was the point that Lindsay Hoyle was making?
Well, look, on this solemn occasion, I'll keep my Lindsay Hoyle impression in my back pocket, but Keir Starmer is the right honourable gentleman, as is Rishi Sunak, because they're both members of the Privy Council. So if you're an MP, you're addressed as an honourable member. If you're a member of the Privy Council, you are right honourable. Actually, technically, you should be saying of Keir Starmer, my right honourable and learned friend, as Keir Starmer is also a barrister in KC.
Absolutely right. There you are. You don't get that on the other side, do you? Right, let's go back to the House.
Although I don't know whether that's when a barrister's addressing. Get in touch to tell us.
Well, Rishi Sunak's not a barrister.
No, I know.
I see. So yes, if you're a barrister, then you might not consider the other one learned.
Yeah.
Somebody get Geoffrey Cox on the phone. He'll know. If we'll have a whip round first.
Well, I was going to say a whip round, and if we can afford to ring the British Virgin Islands anyway.
Yeah, so we can find a landline that can dial international numbers. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the additional support the Prime Minister has outlined today? I've had the privilege, I'm sure he has, of seeing firsthand the brilliant work our military is doing in Salisbury to train Ukrainians in defending themselves. We all support this work and the UK's role in the international drive to ensure that Ukraine has the weapons and the technology required to defend herself. Does the Prime Minister agree that continuing this international effort is the only way to ensure Putin's defeat?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the House may not all be aware that actually we have continued to train Ukrainian soldiers because it's something that we have done for years before the conflict started and something that we should be very proud of. But obviously we've intensified those efforts. Last year we trained 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers through Operation Interflex. This year the Defence Secretary announced that last year we'll be training 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers in addition to the Marines and Air Force pilots that I mentioned earlier. But the right honourable gentleman is right to highlight this has been an international effort. One thing that is a mark of UK leadership in this particular area is that around a dozen other countries have all come here to the UK to take part in our training programmes to support Ukrainian soldiers. Many members from around this House will have visited in their constituencies that effort. It's something that's making an incredible difference on the ground, and I know something that the President Zelensky is incredibly grateful for.
I mean, it's all still an outbreak of COSA consensus. I'll just find one point of difference. I don't think Rishi Sunak has been to Salisbury to see the work of the military. So Keir Starmer brandishing his
putting his fatigues on.
Putting his fatigues on. In fact, the only evidence I can find of Rishi Sunak going to Salisbury was he went and watched the women's Euros in a Salisbury pub, a pub called the Bishop's Mill, which I think I watched England, the men's Euros. I went and saw the first England game in that very pub.
Oh, really?
Anyway, that's a side point. But what we're seeing here is Keir Starmer, not quite literally putting his fatigues on, but making the case for his role as a statesman. So far from anything we'd have expected. I suspect Rishi Sunak won't go here himself today, but so far from anything we'd have expected from Jeremy Corbyn.
No, from Jeremy. Yes, of course. Who remember when he did an interview with John Pienaar on this station last year. Was unwilling to even say whether he admired President Zelensky, in a very Corbynish answer when John Pienaar posed that question to him. His answer was, well, I've never met President Zelensky. So you expect the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn has a very different line throughout this conflict. And that is part of the reason Keir Starmer is doing what he's doing today. There are a wealth of domestic issues he could go on. He could have even constrained this to his very first question. His opening remarks saying, great to see President Zelensky here anyway, let's talk about levelling up or strikes, or not that Keir Starmer wants to talk about strikes, but, talking about the NHS crisis or whatever. that Keir Starmer is going very hard on this is a reflection of the fact this PMQs would not have happened at any point up until 2019.
It's really interesting. Yeah, just looking back at what Jeremy Corbyn said when he was on Times Radio last year, said he hoped that NATO would be ultimately disbanded, saying that military alliances create greater danger in the world. And I think he was saying something similar only last week as well. So, yeah, there is a big gulf between Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn. Right, let's go back then to the House of Commons. This is question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
I think the whole House would like to thank those involved in the incredible training that is going on. Mr. Speaker, before I entered this House, I had responsibility for fighting for justice in The Hague for victims of Serbian aggression. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when the war in Ukraine is over, Putin and all his cronies must stand at The Hague and face justice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right that we must hold those to account for the horrific crimes that they have committed. I'm proud that the United Kingdom has played, again, a leadership role in this regard, being one of the first countries to provide financial and technical support, putting investigators on the ground. We're shortly to be hosting a conference together with the Dutch. And also, one of the things that I discussed with President Zelensky this morning is our support for the work of the ICC, where, thanks to the efforts of UK members, I'm hopeful that we will see the first indictments very shortly.
Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer really ratcheting up the rhetoric, the hard-line position he wants to be seen to be taking against Russia.
Also, I think that's the first hint of partisan posturing from Keir Starmer there. In that you see the bones of his election pitch.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not just his pitch for Labour leadership was, hey guys, I'm a lefty human rights lawyer who, stood foursquare with Swampy in the Green and Common marches. Now it's, I've prosecuted every terrorist you could hope to imagine. I've been in The Hague prosecuting war criminals. Back me and I'll take a similarly hard line on the bad. Yeah, burn them and flog them.
It's interesting, yeah, really interesting that he's going on that so hard. And again, the thing we've discussed the last few weeks at PMQs is Keir Starmer is a sort of transformed man, having started the year so comfortably ahead in the polls. He's got a bit of self-confidence. He doesn't need to worry about the left-wing, Corbynites still in his party who might have got cross about this. He doesn't, and because he's got more confidence, he's just he's willing to stake out his position a bit more rather than constantly triangulating, which is what he thought doing this time last year.
Yeah, two things people who know Keir Starmer well tell me every time I lunch them or go for a drink with them or go for a coffee with them. And I put this question to them. I make that exact point. Keir Starmer seems like a different man to the one who, looked like he was releasing hostage videos in the wake of, say, the Hartlepool by-election victory just under 2 years ago. And they all say he is a man for whom confidence is everything. And he hates losing. And now he's convinced that the Labour Party can and probably will win, which explains why he is so assured and confident in these parliamentary encounters. If the polls narrow, that is the test, though. If the polls narrow over the coming year, as Labour people suspect they will, or at least give lip service to the idea that they will, let's see if Keir Starmer and the Labour Party can hold their nerve and whether he seems so assured in PMQs in 6 or 8 months' time.
Well, we know he hates losing because somebody wrote a very good column this week about his concern about Arsenal being so far ahead, and then they lost.
Yes, Keir Starmer has been refusing to countenance, even in casual conversation, the idea that his beloved Arsenal, last seen in their pomp in the late 90s and 2000s, I'm sure you can see where we're going with this one, listeners, refusing to countenance the idea they can break that habit of 2 decades and finally win. And he's been saying this for weeks, saying, it's only halfway through the season, a lot can happen yet. And, as if on cue, as if to prove his point, Sean Dyche's Everton, unfashionable Everton, that hapless, hopeless, incoherent team in blue. A Route 1 attack.
Could I be clear? These are the views of Patrick Maguire.
Liverpool season ticket holder Patrick Maguire. Beat Arsenal 1-0 as if to prove Keir Starmer's point.
Absolutely, which was the subject of Patrick's excellent column in the Times on Monday. Right, let's go back there. It's the red team against the blue team. It's Keir Starmer, question number 5.
Mr. Speaker, across this House, we don't just hope for Ukraine's victory, we believe in it. And part of that victory must be Ukraine's reconstruction. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Russia should pay for the destruction it has caused through the wealth lying dormant in blocked Russian government assets?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are the third largest humanitarian and economic donor to Ukraine, £1.4 billion of support that we have provided through direct grant assistance and guarantees at multilateral lending organisations. And again, the House will remember we took a lead in imposing economic sanctions on Russian entities, including individuals and state-sanctioned assets. We've ensured the provision of funds here will be put in a foundation for reconstruction in Ukraine, and we are currently working with international partners through the legal process to use those assets to fund Ukrainian reconstruction. Of course, that's something that we all want to see, and we're working with our partners to achieve that.
Keir Starmer.
The comments on the YouTube page are, well, people are very cross about football.
Oh, really?
Gunners, that's a steaming part of Tottenham Hotspurs, steady on the Everton trashing.
Well, it's interesting. Keir Starmer's Director of Communications, Matthew Doyle, is a massive Everton fan, so I suspect on Monday morning there was some frosty.
When he's listening back to this on the podcast, he'll take issue with this.
No, I'm sure he will. I was made aware of disagreements with my description of Everton at the very top of the Labour Party, shall we say? But to be a fly on the wall in Labour's Monday morning meeting after Keir Starmer. I'm surprised the head of comms is still in the job, the devoted Evertonian that he is. But anyway. Interestingly,
some people say, Rachel's saying, total waste of PMQs, easy ride on the reshuffle. John says, total waste of time. Someone else saying, does the right honourable gentleman agree with me that 1 + 1 = 2? Is it a total waste of an opportunity from Keir Starmer? Or does he actually just, tonally doing this occasionally? Someone says, when was the last time PMQs focused entirely on foreign policy? Does he just have to do that sometimes?
It's a really interesting question. Look, I suppose there are two questions here. There are a question of party politics. The party political incentive for Keir Starmer here is obviously to remind voters again and again and again, this is what Keir Starmer's people want to do, and Keir Starmer wants to do, remind them they are not the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn and that they can be trusted on defence. So clearly, as much as it's probably tedious for listeners who are after political theatre, it clearly makes sense. So it's a no-brainer in party political terms.
And it goes to the heart of the thing that we keep getting on our focus groups, and I know the Labour Party do as well, is the complaint that all Keir Starmer does is pick fault and complain, and with Captain Hindsight, all that still keeps cutting through. And so actually, being supportive, constructive, statesman-like is addressing one of the perceived weaknesses of even people who say that they're going to vote Labour.
Yeah, exactly. And also, if President Zelensky is in the UK and he has flown to the UK and made the UK his first visit, and the Labour Party's stated position is, well, yes, we agree with the government on Ukraine, it would be strange if they chose to repay President Zelensky's considerable risk in coming to the UK in saying, well, hang on, we're actually going to talk about something else. It's a big occasion. It's President Zelensky's only his second visit.
Do we know if Starmer's going to meet him?
It's a very good question.
Well, let's try and find out in the next couple of minutes as we go back to the House of Commons. This is question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a country, we've always been at our best when we stand up to tyrannical aggressors threatening their neighbours and peace on our continent. That's why the Labour Party helped found NATO, and why our commitment to NATO is as unshakable today as it was back then. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we remain the leading European ally in NATO, as we always have done. We continue to increase funding in our armed forces by £24 billion at the last spending review to ensure that we maintain not just our NATO obligation to spend 2% of our GDP on defence, but also we participate in every NATO operation and remain the leading nation when it comes to contributions to NATO's Rapid Response Force and the NATO Readiness Initiative. But I join with the right honourable gentleman in saying that this House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Well, that was interesting. Labour helped found NATO, and we have always supported it, which might come as a surprise to anyone who paid any attention to the Jeremy Corbyn years, which Rishi Sunak sidestepped, pointing out the Keir Starmer sat in the shadow cabinet of the NATO critique.
Well, it's an interesting point of tension internally, a minor point of tension, not to blow up every sort of tense water cooler conversation in the leader's office in the Labour Party into a massive crisis for Keir Starmer. But it's interesting. An interesting sort of point of tension is those who were there, the few people who were there during the Corbyn years who are still there, often get quite annoyed when Labour take this line, or they lean into the idea that Jeremy Corbyn was a massive aberration on foreign policy, and Labour is back in a sensible place. Now, it's certainly true that Labour's defence policy is much more hawkish than it was under Jeremy Corbyn. That's incontrovertible. But if we were to have Emily Thornberry in this studio, she would probably say, or probably not Emily Thornberry in the studio, but Emily Thornberry. If you bumped into her in the street and asked her about this PMQs, she may say something like, well, hang on, think of how much worse Jeremy Corbyn's foreign policy could have been if me and Keir Starmer weren't around the table arguing for them not to take positions over Salisbury or whatever. So it's interesting. And I think you can sort of just about square Keir Starmer saying, well, look, it was Clement Attlee's government that founded NATO and we've always supported it. You can mount the argument that, even when Jeremy Corbyn's foreign policy was at its most controversial, at no point did he ever advocate as Labour leader withdrawing from NATO or abolishing Trident. Now, obviously, those views, his historically held views,
although, famously over Salisbury, he was willing to give Russia the benefit of the doubt and said that we should send us a sample of the nerve agent so that Vladimir Putin could tell us whether or not it was one of his. Yeah, and look, even the likes of Andrew Murray, is one of his advisors, and lots of people who were with Jeremy Corbyn, friends of Jeremy Corbyn at the time, now look at that and say that was the point at which we lost decisively the 2019 election, because we just sounded so out of tune with the public and any recognisable idea of consensus in British foreign policy. Well, Scott has messaged in, why are they pretending that the UK isn't in turmoil because Zelensky's in the country? Much prefer them ripping shreds out of each other. # politics with the boring bits. It's the one bit of the show we don't have any control over, Scott, so we don't know what they're going to talk about up until that point. But an interesting moment, I think, for Keir Starmer's leadership, if nothing else. It's all been kicking off on the YouTube channel because the moderators have bumped someone off who was spamming pro-Russian nonsense, so... They're all saying, well done, Times Radio. Thanks, Times Radio. I thought they really like our analysis, Patrick. It's not. They like the fact that someone's blocked an account out there. So, anyway, right, up next, we'll bring you the best of the rest. Somebody's been watching the backbench exchanges so that you don't have to. We'll bring you those in just a moment after we get the very latest news from Rachel Jewell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. The Prime Minister says he's delighted to welcome Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to the UK today, telling the Commons of the unbreakable friendship between the two countries. Mr Zelensky will address Parliament and have an audience with the King. At Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the leader has symbolised the heroism, the resolve and the bravery of his people.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
I join with the right honourable gentleman in saying that this House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Well, as part of their talks, Mr Sunak has offered to extend British training of Ukrainian forces to Marines and fighter jet pilots. Britain has trained 10,000 Ukrainian troops in the past 6 months. Turkey's presidents visited badly affected areas after Monday's earthquakes killed more than 11,000 people in his country and in Syria. President Erdogan has admitted there are certain difficulties with first responders, but the recovery operation is now working well. Post-Brexit trading arrangements with Northern Ireland have been found to be within the law after judges rejected a legal challenge. The UK and EU are negotiating a way to make adjustments to the protocol. A fine afternoon in the south once any freezing fog clears. Increasingly cloudy and windy in the north as an intense but narrow band of rain pushes southeastwards. Kane Reeves has the sports.
England batsman Harry Brooks says he wants to dominate international cricket and push on from the best year of his life. Brooke produced a superb performance for England in their test warm-up against a New Zealand 11 with a score of 97 in just 71 deliveries. It included 9 sixes and 7 fours as the tourists ended on 465 all-out on day one of the two-day pink ball match. England play their first test against New Zealand next week, with Brooke keen to avoid any complacency.
They're a very good test side, aren't they? They're still the Test champions, so they're definitely the team to beat at the minute, and they've got a lot of good players. There's going to be all sorts of challenges coming our way. Bowling wise, they're going to hit us hard, I'm sure, and like I say, they're a very good side, and hopefully we can put our best outfit on.
Meanwhile, Australia's cricketers face the prospect of barely any rest before the first Ashes test in England this summer. They're favourites to reach the final of the World Test Championship, which has been confirmed to start at the Oval on the 7th of June. If it goes into a reserve day, the game will finish 4 days before they play their old rivals. Australia continue their preparations for the Ashes with a test in India. Day one begins at 3:30 tomorrow morning, and live commentary can be heard with our colleagues on TalkSport 2. A former Tokyo Olympics organising committee official has been arrested in Japan for his involvement in alleged bid rigging for test events ahead of the Games. Yasu Mori is being held on a suspected breach of antitrust laws. 3 advertising executives have also been arrested following an investigation into claims of corruption in the planning and sponsorship of the Olympics. Now, the Times website and app has plenty to keep you occupied, including the latest on the managerial search at Leeds United. They're in Premier League action tonight against Manchester United.
This is Times Radio.
The Kuoni sale ends the 13th of February. Make this the year you seize the holiday and travel far, travel wide, travel wild, or with a guide. Travel deep, travel long. Travel boldly, travel on. Our experts are ready to craft you an unforgettable holiday. Search KUONI and travel with the experts you can trust. Sale ends the 13th of February. At or protected and which recommended.
With TalkTalk, you can speed up and spend less on broadband in 2023. Out of contract on superfast fibre? Double your speed and save on average £125 over 18 months by upgrading to TalkTalk Full Fibre 150. That's just $29.95 a month plus no setup fees. Search TalkTalk Full Fibre for deals that make sense. TalkTalk. CPI plus 3.7% annual increase from April 2023, subject to legal availability. Average saving on Full Fibre 150 versus major competitors publicly available out of contract. Standard Fibre 65 equivalent only on 21st October.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker, Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Not a prerequisite.
Very good.
you caught us organising our post-prandial.
Anyway, nice to have you with us. Patrick Maguire, Times Red Box Editor, still here. How are you, Patrick?
Very
I think
well.
Patrick was just about to explain to me on air that you're doing a prereq because you're in for me
I'm
next week.
presenting in Matt Chorley's big chair next week.
Because I'm off to Barnard Castle.
Are you actually? I thought that was a joke.
No, I'm actually going to Barnard Castle and other parts of that
Northumberland.
Northumberland,
County
and
Durham.
Yorkshire. And,
very nice.
Yeah, so, anyway, that's my holiday plans for next week. We've just done PMQs Unpacked, pausing the action live from the House of Commons. Now let's do the best of the West. And we should probably start, as we always do, with the SNP's leader in the Commons. It's Stephen Flynn.
The SNP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, I'd like to send our condolences to all of those impacted by the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and also to welcome the exchange between the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister in respect of Ukraine. We all in this House are united in our condemnation of Vladimir Putin and in our hope for a better future for Ukraine. It will be an honour for all of us to listen to President Zelensky this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, in recent days, the former Prime Minister said that she did not regret her time in office. Does the Prime Minister regret her time in office?
I think we'll clear up which one,
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to all my predecessors for the contribution that they make to public life, and can I join with the honourable gentleman in saying that I know the whole House will be looking forward to hearing from President Zelensky at the conclusion of PMQs.
Stephen Flynn.
Quite a good joke. Pointed question. It's the sort of thing that on a different week Rishi Sunak might have done.
Yes, exactly. But it is interesting, though, isn't it? You do wonder, are there any circumstances in which Rishi Sunak, even in a peacetime PMQs, as it were, Rishi Sunak takes the bait there? I do wonder whether he would feel strong enough and secure enough in his control over the Parliamentary Conservative Party, who, let's not forget, are sort of quiescent and not enthusiastic for the Prime Minister, whether he would ever do the sort of quip one would expect to hear from David Cameron or Tony Blair in that set of circumstances. Yeah. I do wonder, and maybe that's a question of Rishi Sunak's style as well. But, I also thought it was pointed there. All of my predecessors, were unique. For the first time in a very long time, there are 3 former Prime Ministers in the Commons. Yeah. Theresa May, Boris Johnson.
There were 4 former Prime Ministers from this government.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, there we are. Right, that was Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP in Westminster. Now let's hear from the leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate my party with the comments made about the unfolding human tragedy in Turkey and Syria, and with the warm words to welcome our ally, President Zelensky? He will know that this country and this House has total support for Ukraine's resistance to Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion. And it is a source of great pride that the British people have stood firm, united and unwavering in support of the brave heroes of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, when President Zelensky addressed this House last year, he asked that we treat Russia as a terrorist state. Since then, Liberal Democrats have been urging the government to fulfil that request by prescribing the Wagner mercenary group. They are doing Putin's bidding, carrying out atrocities against Ukrainians on a daily basis. So on this symbolic day, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally commit to prescribing the Wagner group, a crucial part of treating Russia as the rogue state that it is?
Interesting policy question.
Mr. Speaker, we have taken a lead from the beginning of this conflict in sanctioning and taking action against those entities connected with the war effort in Russia and beyond. With regard to Wagner Group, the honourable gentleman will know that we have already sanctioned the Wagner Group in its entirety, as well as taking specific action against particular leaders, as he'll know. With regard to prescriptions, it's not something that we routinely comment on in public, but rest assured we continue to keep all of the prescriptions that we have under review.
It's not a no from Rishi Sunak,
but it's also not a yes. There's an interesting the Ed Davey felt maybe because he needs the attention, or that he doesn't get the questions all the time, but to be slightly more pointed in the questioning rather than Keir Starmer didn't really.
Keir Starmer was seeking to present to Vladimir Zelensky and the world and the electorate a settled consensus that the Labour Party and Conservative Party are on the same page, which is useful for Vladimir Zelensky's low. It's useful if you're a Labour politician, it's useful for the electorate to know. As you say, Ed Davey can afford to be slightly more pointed, and what he's trying to draw out there is the perceived gap between the Conservative government's rhetoric on standing up to Russia, particularly when it comes to money and stuff flowing through London, and the loopholes that are still in place that allow friends of the Russian regime to do their thing in London. Now, it's very interesting to hear Rishi Sunak, as you say, it was neither a no nor a yes. And, I wouldn't be surprised if we heard that the Wagner Group had been sanctioned in the coming weeks, have also been prescribed, rather. Yeah. At the same time, he gave no indication that's what he was definitely going to do.
I mean, it's entirely possible. Let's not forget, he's only been in the office for 100 days. It's possibly not a thing which has crossed his desk in a great way. It might actually bring about...
Interesting to hear Ed Davey stake out a very hawkish line on Ukraine, because he's got his own detoxification mission to undergo. Don't forget, if the Liberal Democrats are going to win their target seats in the southeast, in the Surrey commuter belt, in the in the yellow halo of seats around London, very affluent seats around London, he's going to need to present the same sort of image Keir Starmer is trying to present, and not the let's revoke Article 50 now and
EU berets all round.
Well, no, exactly. It's the EU berets. As Tony Blair once wrote, you think of the Lib Dems, you think of a man in socks and sandals and a woman in a slightly too big jumper talking about sex education. Not my words, the words of Sir Tony Blair. And that's Ed Davey is trying very hard.
Tried to shake that off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%. There was one other quote. We don't need to probably play it. Vicky Ford asked for a minute silence across the UK to mark the invasion of Ukraine. And Rishi Sunak said it's being considered. And now the Commons has fallen silent altogether. They've now suspended the Commons chamber because MPs and peers are making their way to Westminster Hall for that speech by Volodymyr Zelensky. We'll bring you that live at 1 o'clock. Did you get an answer to the question of whether or not Keir Starmer's going to meet?
Not yet.
I have.
Have you?
Oh, Labour people replied to me faster than replied to you. Apparently there's a reception in Speaker's House later where he will probably meet him, but then Keir Starmer and President Zelensky not having a one-to-one. So there we are.
A snub, a veritable snub. No, he's a very busy man.
He's a very busy man. As are you, Patrick. So I'll let you get off. Patrick
Thank you
McGuire will
very
be
much.
in your inbox in a couple of hours with PMQs Unpacked, because Lara Spirits is got a week off. Man doesn't stop working.
What can I say?
So yes, PMQs Unpacked, the email in your inbox at 2:30 today. 2:30 today, Patrick?
Yeah, I think I'll make that.
2:30 today.
I've been writing copious notes.
Times, good point. Times subscribers, of course. Sign up, go to thetimes.co.uk/Redbox. Right, we will bring you Volodymyr Zelensky's speech to Parliament live at 1. Up next, we take a look at the history of other people who've addressed Westminster Hall. That's next on Times Radio.
Kate Borsay, tonight from 8 on Times Radio.
We're joined by film and TV composer Peter Rayburn, whose new album, Recovery, was written following his life-saving brain surgery. We'll continue to monitor the situation in Turkey and northern Syria and to go through the other